I'm David Hepworth. Thanks for clicking this Word in Your Ear podcast, videocast thing for which there is no name. Mark Ellen and I have been creating in this line since 2007. And if any of it has met with your approval, then please click to subscribe because it helps. Leave a comment because we like to hear from you, and maybe even consider becoming a Patreon supporter because then, well, you'll be one of us. Visit patreon.com/wordinyourear for details. Welcome to another Word in Your Ear. And our guest this week to talk about his book, Living in the Present with John Prine. It's Tom Piazza. Am I pronouncing that correctly, Tom?
Yeah, that's it.
All right, fine, good. And just give you an idea of Tom's credentials. He's written several novels, not just books, novels, but also had a certain amount of journalism in publishing titles, New York Times and Rolling Stone and so forth, and was also one of the writers on Treme, the David Simon drama about New Orleans, which makes sense because he lives in New Orleans. You were just saying, Tom. So how long you lived in New Orleans?
31 years.
So where do you come from originally?
Outside New York on Long Island, where I was raised, and then went to school up in Massachusetts, lived in Manhattan for 14 years, went out to Iowa for the Iowa Writers Workshop. You know about that, and spent 3 years there, and then moved to New Orleans.
Right. Is New Orleans full of incomers? Is it one of those kind of places?
You mean people who've moved there by choice?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, totally. And especially after Treme showed, I think it kind of stimulated people's imagination about the place. Hope the place fulfilled their imaginations in a positive way. Yeah.
Right. Hey, it always fascinates me because there's a very big difference between Britain and the United States. That Americans, it seems to me, move across the country and they don't have any problem doing it at all. Whereas British people very rarely do it, partly because the country is so small, Whereas every film we ever see has got Americans at some point in the film, they place all their possessions in a U-Haul trailer, which they put in behind a truck or whatever. And then they just go somewhere thousands of miles away, which just seems extraordinary to me. But anyway, John Prine.
Yeah, I think that's kind of burned in.
Oh, right. That go on. You were going to say, yeah, go on.
No, I was going to say, I think that's kind of burned into the collective consciousness, or the whole place is based on movement, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, you had to move a long way to get here in the first place, a couple hundred years ago, a few hundred years ago, and then you had to expand. It just seemed to be part of the whole thing, and it's just deeply encoded in people's conception of what they're doing, I think.
And it's particularly a part of American popular music, it all strikes me. That huge amount of American songs are about moving. If I go to another place, life will be better or it will be worse or whatever.
That's right. It's like that old, the blues lyric, the sun's going to shine in my back door someday, I'll move down the line. You're either, sometimes the songs are about moving someplace for something better. And sometimes the songs are about moving back home because it wasn't so great where we moved to in the first place.
Midnight Train to Georgia is the classic case of this, isn't it? Which starts, L.A. proved too much for the man, which is a wonderful opening line. It's all gone wrong. Somebody's going back. Anyway, let's talk about John Prine. So when did John Prine first come into your life?
Well, my brother-in-law, Stokes Howell, and a buddy of his, that family on my better half's side is from Missouri, cotton farming country. So I used to go up there. We'd go up there in the summers, and my brother-in-law and his pal were just John Prine fanatics. And so they would sing these songs. And that was really the first time I heard John. And now this, we're talking 30 years ago, 25, 30 years ago. So I would hear these songs. I thought, oh, that's nice. That's nice. But I was listening to different kinds of stuff at that time. But they stuck with me. John's songs have a kind of quality of attaching themselves to earworms in a way. But John came to New Orleans in 2016 and did a show at the Sanger Theater, the big theater in downtown New Orleans. And it just rocked me. His presence was unique. It was this mixture of, kind of tenderness and wry angle on everything. And at one point, he did his song Mexican Home as a solo performance. And the song's about his father's death, but you don't find that out until the final verse. And I remember sitting there with tears coming down my cheeks. And I sort of thought, well, what is this? Why am I weeping? And it kind of stuck with me. And he returned 2 years later in January of 2018. So I made arrangements to meet up with him about possibly doing an article. And it was just one of those things, David. I mean, we clicked. It just almost before we really had anything to say, we just were kind of like looking at each other like we were sharing some kind of joke. I don't know what the joke is to this day, but it was funny. And so we made an arrangement for me to go and do a road trip with him in Florida. Short road trip.
So you ended up being part of his life for the last 2 years of his life, is that right?
Yeah. And vice versa, yeah.
Right. But you'd never heard him back in the day, in the early 70s. You'd just heard his songs via these relatives of yours. That's extraordinary. Because it always strikes me as one of the odd things about John Prine was that first album, and arrived in 1971 as the part of the great new Bob Dylan scare. It also involved Loudon Wainwright and I don't know Elliot Murphy and anybody else who had a jean jacket and a harmonica holder or whatever. They were looking for a new Bob Dylan, were they, for a while? And he got a lot of kind of publicity and profile out of that. And he came to the UK and Europe, but obviously that didn't happen. And yet those songs remained really well known in an odd way, didn't they? Which songs are we talking about here? Sam Stone and Hello in There and all those
Angel from Montgomery.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, many of them.
They proved to have kind of legs, didn't they? Those songs in a way that you wouldn't have predicted.
Yeah, no, that's true. Yeah.
So as a writer yourself, not necessarily a songwriter, although you may have done it. I mean, what made him exceptional as a songwriter, do you think?
Well, I think his songs are, maybe you'd say, deceptively simple sounding. I mean, he always talked about how he basically knew 3 chords. Yes. And if he really had to stretch, he'd throw in a 4th chord. That was a little bit of an exaggeration on his part, but it's not too far from the truth. So there was a simplicity to that, and a relative simplicity in the melodic line that he would be singing. But there was a complexity in the, how would you say, the emotional distance to the material or the angle of light on the material. So he would sing a song like, oh man, pick so many of them. There was a song like Speed of the Sound of Loneliness, maybe, where the situation is relatively dire, but the melodic posture is rather jaunty, and he did that thing all the time in both directions, and he wrote a lot of songs about he wrote a lot of songs about people passing away. Please don't bury me down in that cold, cold ground. I'd rather have them cut me up and pass me all around. So he'd write these things, and they were kind of jolly songs, and yet they were about people, having to knock on the pearly gates and being denied admittance, et cetera, et cetera. So there was a kind of built-in deceptive complexity to what he was doing, an attitude that was all his own. Yeah.
And I suppose they were the kind of songs that you'd find yourself singing to yourself, wouldn't you? After a while. And then it would only strike you after you'd sung it about 6 times what it was about. Because he was, as you say, I've saw him more than once, you could put him on in front of any kind of crowd and he would get them on side because he wasn't one of those kind of, it wasn't like I've suffered for my art, now it's your turn. It wasn't like that at all, was it?
No, he wasn't. There's a great moment. There's a record that, I don't know if there's the equivalent in the UK or what, but there was a record that was released here called John Prine Live. It's material probably from the 80s, 1980s, when he was doing solo performances a lot. And there's a moment where they are where he's going to sing Illegal Smile. This is a fantastic moment, actually. If you know that song, you may sing tonight with an illegal smile, don't cost very much, but lasts a long while, not long enough. But anyway, so John was in between songs, and everybody from the audience, it was a live recording, everybody from the audience is hollering out song requests. And he says, we're making a live recording tonight, and that song isn't on the record until side 3. Okay, and then he says, but I tell you what, you're going to have your chance now. I'm going to sing this song, and you're all welcome to join in, right? So he starts singing Illegal Smile. And the audience starts singing along right away. But when you get to the refrain, you may see me tonight with an illegal smile, etc., the whole audience joins in. And on the last time around, the last chorus, he drops out and lets the whole audience sing it. But that is so characteristic. And it also tells you something about the nature of his relationship to his fans. His fans love, I can't really think of any other performer who I know of or who I know whose fans are so, there are plenty of passionate fans of many, many musicians, but I think there's a kind of love for John that's remarkable and sort of sui generis, I never encountered it before.
Right. So how did you went on a road trip with him? Tell us about that.
Right. Well, so when we, I made arrangements when I went back to talk to him in New Orleans when he came on that visit. And I went up to Nashville to sort of confirm the details. And then we made arrangements. I'd go down to this vacation house they had in Florida. So I showed up, and John had just taken delivery of a 1977 Cadillac Coupe De Ville, candy apple red, marshmallow white interior. He bought it on eBay for $10,000. Immensely
practical purchase, I would imagine.
Well, absolutely. My God. It was a bargain. And he had it delivered from Pennsylvania. I don't know if you can relate to it. It's probably
that's a long way, yeah.
1,200 miles, something like that. Yeah. Delivered down to this little house in Florida the night before I got there. I was not the reason for it. It was a coincidence. So anyway, so the next day we took a spin in the car, but the potential mishaps were like dominoes falling. Like there was no seatbelt on my side in the car. John had a seatbelt, but there was no seatbelt on my side. And then it turned out what's the opening of the book? I could read the opening of the book, but the scene opens in the book of us being at this gasoline station, And he comes out of the convenience store with 2-gallon jugs of water. And I said, "Isn't there coolant in the radiator?" He said, "I don't know." You know, when it starts smoking, we'll stop and get a beer. So I think the way I put it in the book was he showed a kind of amused nonchalance toward potential disaster. And that's, I think that's absolutely accurate up and down the line. As we drove, it turned out he didn't have the real plates, the real license plates on the car. He had taken them off of his SUV the morning that the car got delivered. Anyway, antic stuff in some ways, and we just laughed ourselves silly, I guess, It was just wonderful. It was a great trip. We had to drive all the way down to, not that it was that far, to Sarasota. So however many miles that was, we had a long lunch talking about everything. It was an interview, but it wasn't the kind of interview really where you're sticking a mic in somebody's.
No.
It was just like hanging out. We talked a lot about Bob Dylan, who we both, knew in various contexts, and talked a lot about and talked a lot about mortality in the car on the way home, because as John had a horrible bout with neck cancer in the late 90s, 1990s. 1996 or 7, I think, was when he had the operation, which set his head in a kind of cocked attitude for the rest of his life, and affected the way he sang. His voice got much grainier and a little deeper, and he had to adjust the key that he was singing in, because his voice got lower, so you have to adjust. And then in what was it, 2013, then he had lung cancer. And he did what the doctor sort of told him to do as a kind of exercise regimen, and he was back touring the world and the country. So this was a person who really liked to play music and really liked to be on stage and felt very comfortable at it, and he made the audience feel comfortable.
It's an interesting thing about, I think he mentions this where he's talking about his early life. I think you also talked to his brother, don't you? Because his brother was the person who kind of taught him how to play and so forth, the older brother. And but I tell you what fascinates me about John Prine is he was in the army when he was like 17, 18 or whatever he was. And then he was a mailman, wasn't he, in Chicago for quite a few years. And he was composing songs, but none of his friends knew that he did it. He didn't play them live, didn't he, until about 1970.
Right. That's right.
Which is a really unusual thing to do.
That's right. That's really true. Well, he said, he grew. Well, I might have to backtrack a bit to clue this information, but we at a certain point we'd known each other about a year and a half when he asked me to write his memoir with him. And he had said that for the whole time I'd known him, he was saying, "Oh boy, we both loved Bob Dylan's memoir, Chronicles, Volume 1, like the way it was put together." But he said that's for when you're almost. He said people keep asking him to do a memoir, and he said that's for when you're almost dead, which had a kind of chilling resonance later on when the way things fell out that way. But so he finally, after we knew each other for a year and a half, he asked me to do his memoir with him, which we did. Now I'm forgetting why I started this. Something. What was the lead into that?
Well, we're talking about the fact that as a young man, he composed songs but didn't actually play them to anybody.
Right. Okay. So one of the first things he told me when we broke ground on the memoir was that when he was, 13, 14, something like that, all his friends were juvenile delinquents.
Yes.
I mean, rough fellas. And so, and he kept it to himself because he said that the basic take that his friends had was that musicians were, I won't use the actual word they used, but let's say, rather not to be taken seriously.
Yeah, they didn't aspire to be long-haired musicians. That's fair to say, did they? They were regular guys. Okay, fine. So he kept it. He kept this from people.
Yeah, essentially, that's right. Although when he was in the army, he brought his Gibson guitar over there and used to play and did some songs over there. I think probably because he wasn't around a bunch of juvenile delinquents. And then, of course, when he started doing his mail route, things had shifted to, and he got married. Um, but he was still kind of keeping it private. I don't think he really had much of a thought about performance per se, But his brother, as you mentioned, his brother Dave, his elder brother, uh, just kind of swamped him with all this sort of roots music and country music and early folk music. So, John Hurd, Mississippi John Hurd, the Carter family, Jimmy Rogers, Ramblin' Jack Elliott, and then finally Bob Dylan, who his brother played for him one time, or they watched it on TV. And it changed the course of his life, as he would say very readily. Um, yeah.
So, did you find question I go ask you? Your long car drive. Don't you find that's the ideal way to interview people?
Yeah,
it is. Well, believe you me, it is. Because you're both looking at the road. You're not looking at each other.
That's right. Actually, it made it very. Plus, there were a lot of things that you'd see or that would kind of happen by the wayside that you could riff off of.
Absolutely.
He began our conversation by talking about this. I think it was a 1951 Buick, or so. I can't remember the exact car right now, but it was this big, beautiful antique car, and he was making at that point. This was the late mid 1970s. He was making the trip between Chicago suburb where he was living and Nashville, and eventually moved to Nashville. But on one of these trips, he was driving and went above 100 miles an hour, and he had a radio with a speaker in the car, and a voice came over the radio from a policeman, who was said, "Why don't you slow that big bad green thing down? It's too pretty to stop." But and then after that, every time something would come up, would kind of make some comment about people's, proper appreciation or not of that car. Right, he was a very funny guy. John had a great sense of humor.
Oh, definitely. As you can tell from all his songs, even the ones that are tragic dimensions, there's, he was the perfect representation of the old theory that if it's not funny, you're not telling the truth. The humor was part of his truth, wasn't it? Mm-hmm. Definitely. You also Absolutely. You were there. You were there when he had various, prominent admirers, obviously Bob Dylan being one of them. But you were there, you had dinner with him and Elvis Costello.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
That was, sure. I'd come to know Elvis because I was one of the writers for the Treme series that you brought up. Excuse me. And Elvis appeared in the pilot, the first episode, and then he appeared again, I think it was in the third episode. But when they were filming the pilot, I was on set and fell in talking to Elvis. And it turned out that he knew a book I had written called True Adventures with the King of Bluegrass about a crazy weekend I spent at the Grand Ole Opry with bluegrass singer Jimmy Martin. But Elvis and I just sort of fell into, it was sort of like when I met John. We just became buddies very quickly. And he's one of my best friends, if I may say. And anyway, when the Americana Festival, which happens every year in September in Nashville, it's a big gathering of everything that could fit under the rubric of roots music, whether it's country, old time music, folk music, even jazz, blues, certainly. So Elvis was going to be appearing there. I think he got a Lifetime Achievement Award there from T-Bone Burnett. And I wanted to go up. I wanted to spend the week there too, because it sounded like a lot of fun. And I knew that Elvis and John really loved each other. At a distance, they didn't see each other a lot, but they had a great affinity for one another. And Elvis had a TV series for a couple seasons, cable series. And he interviewed John on that. It was an interview plus music kind of show. So anyway, I said to Elvis that would he want to hook up like a dinner with John, at his house? So we agreed that would be a great thing. And we went down to John's house one evening and had a big old dinner. And Joe, the producer and great songwriter, Joe Henry was there, and Jason Wilbur, John's longtime guitarist, and we just had a great evening telling stories. And until I think somewhere around the third course, Elvis hollers, "It's on fire!" And what was on fire was John's jukebox, his highly prized jukebox. I can tell you this. I suppose I should back up, but I don't know if you're editing this or what.
No, go on.
Forgive me for going back. And John, all right. So John had this beautiful jukebox, and it was a shrine to 1950s popular music. And the reason he had it was his compadre, Steve Goodman, the wonderful songwriter and performer. Steve Goodman was really John's best friend throughout the 70s and very early 80s until he died of leukemia. But so they co-wrote a song just for kicks one time, and trying to use every conceivable country music cliche you could imagine. Okay, so it had lyrics in it like, "I was drunk the day my mom got out of prison."
Yeah.
Stuff like that, So they co-wrote this song, and at the end of it, they were going to do something. John said, I don't think that's much of a song. Steve, you got it, And Steve really wanted to give him some share of whatever money was realized. Well, it turned out there was a lot of money realized from this. And David Allan Coe had a huge hit with it, right?
Oh, really?
Yeah. And called the song "You Never Even Called Me by My Name." So they had this big hit with it. And so there was all this money. And John wouldn't take any money. So Steve got this giant jukebox. And brought that to John's house because he knew that John would not refuse such a profound artifact from our cultural heritage. So moved it in there, and then John eventually got divorced and changed houses, and the jukebox moved with him every place, or almost every place, and finally ended up in this beautiful house where he and Fiona, his wife Fiona, where they were living and where we had this dinner. But, they plugged it in, the jukebox was kind of going there, and we had this dinner, and then Elvis smelled the fire. And it turned out the jukebox was, in fact, emitting clouds of smoke from the back of it. So we had to get out. Jason Wilbur, I remember, went under and pulled the plug and whatever. And Fiona had to open the windows. But the way it ended up falling out, I asked Jason Wilbur, his guitarist, afterwards. I said, what was that about, the whole big fire? And Jason said, yeah, he had asked John about it afterwards. He said, what was it? And John said, yeah, I think that's what happened last time I plugged it in.
So
it's very characteristic of John, It's like, oh, yeah, I blew the house up last time I tried that.
Yeah, he'd never heard of health and safety, had he, really?
Well, he had heard of it, probably. Yes. I don't know if he did much about it, but...
No, I'm intrigued by the idea of having dinner with Elvis Costello and John Prine, because they could both tell stories, couldn't they?
Oh, God, yeah.
I mean, they because I dealt with both of them, and they never forgot anything. That's a great property of both of them. You know what I mean? You can remember the detail of everything. And most people you meet can't remember the detail. They could.
It's absolute. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, and it informs their songwriting, doesn't it? And also their storytelling. And I've seen Elvis Costello go on stage and just tell stories half an hour. And John Prine could do that, couldn't he? Yeah. I mean, the eldest baby in the world story on the live, just how that song got written. It's a 10-minute comedy routine.
Yeah, or Sabu visits the Twin Cities.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but Elvis is, I mean, if you've read his autobiography, you
Yeah,
probably his memory of the most granular details of his childhood and in England and all the places he used to go with his father and the people he remembers from when he
he
was 8.
remembers.
It's uncanny.
I saw him do a thing at Ronnie Scott's, the jazz club in London.
Uh-huh.
And he just stood on the stage and he went, first time I came here, I sat on that table. And he told you who he was with and who he saw. And then next time I came, I was over there. He just had that kind of memory. So, I mean,
John had that too, yeah.
Going back to your book, obviously. Why is it called Living in the Present with John Prine?
Yeah. So that was the title I used for that article that I did for the Oxford American magazine here when we took that road trip. And the reason I chose it, he wrote a song called Living in the Present. Yeah, we are living in the, no. The song was called Living in the Future. And, the refrain was, we are living in the future. I'll tell you how I know. I read it in the paper 15 years ago. I always thought that was a characteristic little fillip of wit that John emitted. And so when it came time to do the piece, that was really, in a way, it just suffused that idea of being really in the present, seemed to suffuse everything attached to John in some kind of way. He wasn't a big one, at least that I ever saw or heard or knew about in any way, a big one for planning and, here's going to be this and that. Somebody would take care of his gigs, and schedule and he'd go there and whatever. But he was what he loved in my experience of him and from everything else I've heard, what he loved was being there, eating a meal together, going on a drive, playing pool, playing music. We sat up a number of times until I remember once I was in December of 2019. I came by, I would route myself going north. I'd route myself through Nashville so we could have a visit. We stayed up very, very late playing songs around the dining room table. Just Jimmy Rogers, Townes Van Zandt, Dylan, good God, Carter Family, whatever came to mind. And Fiona was upstairs. She'd cashed in her chips and went to sleep. I asked her, I said, I apologized the next day. I said, oh God, I'm sorry we kept you up till 1 o'clock. She said, 1 o'clock? She said, you guys were up until 3:30 in the morning. I said, oh no, I'm so sorry. But that was how it was. So he was always about doing things that involved some kind of communal celebration of being alive in the moment, if that doesn't sound too grandiloquent. And I have to think that some of that must have had something to do with, the mortality factor in his awareness of where he was in life. I mean, if you've had those two major bouts with cancer and then other associated, facts of life, you're liable to have maybe a somewhat different relationship to the moment than if you don't deal with those kinds of things. Things that might seem like expendable moments ordinarily take on a different weight, I'd say.
Yeah. Do you think he was one of those people? Did you find he was one of those people who, when he got older, he was kind of more and more grateful to have had the chances he's had? To still play music in his 60s and 70s and still have an audience.
Well, I think he was very grateful for it. I think he was always grateful for that. I don't think John was ever not aware of the good luck he had had in life. I mean, just the way he got started. The story is in the book. It's in Living in the Present with John Prine. The way he got started was kind of astonishing good luck. I mean, he was playing guitar and singing in a little bar, essentially, a bar with a stage, in Maywood, Illinois, or actually in Chicago. And one evening, Chris Christopherson just happened to be in town playing somewhere else. And Steve Goodman, John's great and good friend and booster, went and insisted I can't tell if he actually clubbed Chris Christopherson on the head and dragged him by the ankles to go see John, but it was the equivalent. Uh, and he brought Chris Christopherson to the club. It was after hours. They were putting the chairs on the table, and he insisted that Steve said, you got to play your whole set for Chris.
Whole thing.
So John went and sang, he'd take them off, Sam Stone, Donald and Lydia, just went through the whole thing, Illegal Smile. And Chris Christopherson I think he made him sing the set again. He kind of couldn't believe his ears because the stuff was so lucid and so witty, but with such an undercurrent. And also John was a very adroit poet also. You can't come up with lines like, there's a hole in daddy's arm where all the money goes. Those aren't just, dummy lines, They stick and it's hard to pull them out, So anyway, I think John recognized the extraordinary luck of having Chris Christopherson come to see him that night. And it resulted pretty much immediately in John getting a recording contract with Atlantic Records. And so those kinds of good fortune, you obviously have to discount for bouts with major health issues or challenges, but I think he recognized just how fortunate he was and to be so loved by these audiences, But John liked being in the world, He took full measure of it and enjoyed it to the hilt. He really did.
Well, look, there's the book, Living in the Present with John Prine by Tom Piazza, out now. I'm sure you can find it. Do you find John Prine's kind of? Do you get the feeling his constituency is growing?
Yeah, actually, which is obviously not automatic for anybody, but it turned out that John. There's a whole generation now of singer-songwriters, mostly clustered around Nashville, who feel that they owe a tremendous amount to John's work and example, sort of. So you have people like Jason Isbell, Brandi Carlile, Billy Strings, who honored John, and Amanda Shires. Oh my God, tick off the whole list. And these folks really all acknowledge a very heavy debt to John's songwriting and to his presence and to who he was as a person. So no, and now with this book, with Living in the Present with John Prine, I've been kind of astonished by how much mail I get from people who love the book and who love John. And this kind of became a new way of expressing their sense of loss that John isn't here anymore, but also their sense of happiness that they get to spend more time with him in a way. I mean, that was really what I was trying to do in the book, I guess you'd have to say, was because that loss, John died, we haven't mentioned it, but John died in April of 2020 from COVID. And that loss hit everybody really hard. For one thing, it was one of the first, quote unquote, high profile deaths from COVID, but also, it hit people just really hard. People loved him and felt an identification with him in a very straightforward and non-idolatrous kind of way. He is almost like a kind of everyman to people, I think.
Yeah.
Excuse me. And just to finish it out, I mean, I think that the book, what I tried to do was bring John alive on the page to the best extent that I could. And I think the people who love John and miss him and valued him would find that. Yeah.
And final question, if you were going to direct somebody who'd never heard John Prine to go and listen to one of his songs, what would you choose?
Oh, God.
Well, there's loads of them.
Huh?
There's loads of them.
I know. That's what makes it difficult. I'd have to say, today, at this moment, this hour, particularly this hour in my nation's history, I might choose your flag decal won't get you into heaven anymore.
That'll do. That'll do. You could also have the eldest baby in the world. But anyway, let's not go there. Tom, it's been really nice to talk to you.